Good evening and welcome. Good evening. Good evening. Thank you so much for joining us. We have quite a few people joining us today, so I believe we'll get started in about 2 minutes. Thank you so much.
Hi, Tanisha, can you hear me now?
Yes, and thank you so much. I'm so sorry that you didn't get the panelist link, but thank you. Sorry, I hope I didn't have you waiting for too long.
No. I was clicking the wrong invite, I think, at first. So I was still getting myself together on my end, and now I'm trying to get the
No
camera to
worries.
turn on.
You can just blame it all on me. We do not blame our guests here. So I will take the blame on that. Like I said, we have quite a few people who have registered, which is so exciting. I know I have a lot of questions. I've shared with you some of my questions. I still want to make sure to leave time for all of our participants. So I'm
Absolutely.
thinking maybe one more minute. We'll get started right at 35 to give people a chance to join.
Absolutely. And honestly, if we get to Q&A quicker, I'm fine with that as well. So just wanted
Okay.
to mention that up front.
Thank you. Thank you.
No problem. And Tanisha, do you know how many people we're gonna have joining today?
So we had about 120, which is what our sign up. So I'm just thinking if we can get closer to like the halfway mark, but I'm sure if
Yep.
people don't get a chance to join us live here, then they can watch it on our YouTube because I'll make sure to have the recording um, posted by early tomorrow.
Oh,
Awesome. All right, so on my laptop where I have my notes so I can record everything, it says 35. So are you good to get started?
yeah, I'm good whenever you are.
All right, thank you. All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the second webinar in our three-part series on Philadelphia's fiscal year 2026 budget. I'm Tanisha Beju, Program Director here at Committee of 70, and I'll be your host tonight for our conversation on how the city plans to invest into making Philadelphia safer, cleaner, greener with economic opportunity for all. This budget reflects Mayor Parker's vision for the city as outlined in her March 13th budget address. And today we'll be breaking down the investments for what the investments mean for residents, businesses, and communities. I am so excited to be in conversation tonight with Matt Stitt. If I can move this along. So he is former chief financial officer for Philadelphia City Council and a financial expert with deep experience in the city budgets. I encourage everyone who is here tonight to drop your questions in the chat. Like I said at the outset, we'll make time to incorporate your questions as well. Before we dive in, Matt, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Tanisha, and welcome everybody to the webinar. Always happy to do these types of panels, and especially if it's informing and educating the community. Um, as Tanisha mentioned, I'm currently a managing director at PFM. I'm also the president of our consulting practice. And PFM's a firm, used to be called Public Financial Management. It's a financial advisory consulting firm. We've been around for almost 50 years, still headquartered here in Philadelphia, but we are national. And a lot of my work I do during the day is supporting people that are currently in a role that I used to be in when I was CFO for city council or other finance directors, treasurers, across the country, other major cities. So I'm happy to be here today to talk about Philly's budget, which is a very complex one. Philadelphia is a city and a county that brings a lot more complexity to its budget. Um, and yeah, I'm also heavily involved. I teach at Fells. I'm an adjunct professor there. I've been teaching for about 5 or 6 years now. I used to teach performance management. I teach a class on critical issues on public finance now. I'm on a number of boards throughout the area. I'm born and raised in Philadelphia. I grew up in Mount Airy and still reside here in Fairmount, Brewerytown section of the city. My family. Um, Anything else, Tanisha, in terms of my background?
You are booked and busy. I hope there's nothing more that you're obligated to do. Thank you so much. With all of that, I feel like this is going to be such a really great conversation for the very diverse audience that we have. We have people from RCOs who might not have tons of experience diving into the budget. We have people who are very knowledgeable. So it's really great to know that you wear so many different hats and will be able to explain things for people and meet them wherever they are. To set the stage a bit before we dive into the different parts of the mayor's vision around cleaner, greener, public safety, I just want to talk about Philadelphia's fiscal health. So, Philly has very unique challenges as a city that we often hear about our high poverty rate. We have a lot of residents who rely on city services, whether that's housing assistance or the piloted zero fare program through SEPTA. We have a lot of people that are drawing on the city that the city supports. And at the same time, we have a smaller tax base than some other cities. So, like Chicago has like 2.6 million people. And so, with those challenges, we have to be really strategic about how we invest and spend our money. And can you give us just like a general, like, can you describe our fiscal health for the city right now, where we stand?
Yeah, actually, the fiscal health of the city has improved steadily, even since my time in City Hall. Before my time in City Hall, things actually dating back to the Rendell administration. If once the city was almost on the brink of bankruptcy, and that's why PICA was created via legislation, and that's what started the requirement of having a balanced 5-year plan. And by the way, that requirement that started in Philadelphia is something that's been adopted as a best practice nationally. There's lots of other places. If you look at how many places do multi-year financial plans now versus how many did them in the early 90s, there's a drastic difference. So Philadelphia was um, almost forced to do it. It was part of a deal with the state so they could actually get the extra revenue they needed. And they also cannot access capital markets at the time due to their low credit rating. But if you look at, what the city has achieved since, there's always some ebbs and flows. There's always recessionary periods, small setbacks here and there. But overall, the city has improved drastically. It's reflected in their credit rating. They actually just received 2 upgrades last year. They're in the A range now, which is it's not the highest, it's the top tier of the high range. You can become AAA in those things, but being in A range in general is impressive given where the city came from. If you look at their reserve levels, they're much healthier than they were a decade ago. They have a functional fund balance. They have a rainy day fund now. That was Council Member Gilmore Richardson's legislation. That's also another best practice that lots of other cities try to adopt. And he found ways to manage through their budgets. I mean, one of the things that the city of Philadelphia has always done, I like to say every other year is some type of funding crisis, education being one of the main ones. But when the city needs to rein in spending, which is they have strong management to do those things in smart ways that don't really impact services, or when the city needs to raise revenue, take the necessary steps to take a tax vote, they usually step up. And all of those things have led to a much stronger foundation of fiscal health. They hit their fund balance target ranges. They have a labor reserve. Contractual costs are the most expensive costs for the city's budget. And setting money aside ahead of time, knowing that those costs are going to go up, puts the city in a better position. The pension fund has drastically improved, and pension reform was something that was a high priority when I was CFO of council and legislation was passed at that time. Mayor Parker was then majority leader. At the time, we did pension reform and kind of moved the city towards the hybrid plans, and got the discount rate back more in line with real market returns, and came up with the revenue recognition policy, a host of smaller things that led to the larger reform. The funded ratio of the pension fund when we started was about mid 40s, and I think it's now at mid 60s. Drastic improvement in a short period of time. So, lots of things that I would like to say were unfunded liabilities or fixed liabilities. The city has been able to decrease those. So getting healthier, more solvent from a long term, but also being able to, budget smart on the short term, and really building up their reserves at the same time. So it's paying down fixed costs, building up reserves, and still trying to find money for new investments and to fund your core services. But I would say overall, headed in the right direction, and in a decent spot now.
And I think a lot of people can relate to some of the pieces that you were talking about in their own, like when they're thinking of their own financial health. When I heard you talk about PICA and just like getting us out of, as a city, out of the difficult place that we were in before. We about 2 years ago paid back everything, correct, that
Mhm.
we had owed. And so, but we kept PICA on for another 25 years because financial advisors are wonderful to have. And I think that's something that as everyday Philadelphians, we understand, also contributing more to our pension, going from, I heard you say, from 40 to 60%. And where the goal, of course, is to fund 100% over time.
It's fully funded. It ranges. Sometimes 80%. Um,
Hmm.
it can be seen as the actuarial standard. But yes, once you get above 80%, it's like that first hurdle. So when we
Hmm.
originally did pension reform, we were building towards 80%.
Hmm.
Once you get to 100%, it is actually fully funded, not actuarially fully funded.
Hmm.
So regardless, it's shoring up a liability in the future, and it does open up, year to year budget savings, redirecting
Hmm.
money that's being used to spend down the liability towards other, again, newer investments, other programs and services to get at the other challenges of the city.
Yeah, and I think not to assume that everyone is at the elder millennial stage that I am, but I'm definitely in that age of thinking about the more that I contribute to pension, like eventually I can use that money once I get to maybe the equivalent for me of an 80%, then I can use that money elsewhere. And the city is doing the same, as well as I heard you talk about the different funds, the rainy day fund that we're setting money aside. And again, I just want to like always think about regular everyday Philadelphians and how we can make sense of the city's budget, even though it's vastly different numbers. So thank
Yeah.
you so much for that. Is there anything else that before we dive into the different buckets within the mayor's vision that people should know related to our fiscal health?
No, just that, the city's fiscal health should always be looked at in the same lane that is also the poorest top 10 city. So there's always going to be a balancing act of, building reserves, funding your unfunded liabilities, and getting just better cash flow wise. But at the same time, there's a lot of need because of the high poverty, and that comes in the form of lots of programs and services. So it's always it's fiscal health, and then it's fiscal health, but what is the purpose of government and its spending to get at
Mhm.
other challenges too. So I just wanted to make sure the audience knows that there can be two different lenses of how you think about this. It's not only fiscal health, right?
Mhm.
Fiscal health in terms of what is your budget doing. You're going to need a budget because you have needs as well. So it's, yeah, you don't want to stop or decrease service delivery or program offerings, but at the same time, you want to make sure that you have enough money to fund new things and existing things as well. So it's a constant balancing act.
And I think that's a perfect transition into one of the things that we spend the most on. Public safety is definitely at the core, or one of the things. Public safety is at the core of Mayor Parker's budget. She's emphasized that while crime is declining, the city must continue to invest in law enforcement and community based programs. So
Mhm.
I have a few investments that are posted, like the new forensic lab, the expansion of body cameras, the wellness court.
Mhm.
Um, I wonder if you can start with like a comparison between, so when we see throughout the budget address, like when we hear of different programs and initiatives that are started, can you kind of give us a comparison between this year's budget around public safety initiatives and last year's?
Yeah, I certainly kind of did. I took a look at particularly the police budget before this webinar because I did want to see how the numbers compared to last year. And the reason why I chose police on purpose because they're a little bit I think police sometimes is a little bit more of a challenge to get their workforce and things to the right size when it comes to their budget. So um, when it comes to public safety, I think overall investment has increased. If you look at capital and operating both sides, there's, as you see, there's some capital investments going here, new labs, new spaces.
Mhm.
Those can be seen as one-time costs with, recurring maintenance and things like that. Obviously, you need to outfit these buildings with people. So there could be some new personnel, could be existing personnel, just depends. But it's always a combination of what are that one time, capital you need to build the space or rehab the space, and what's the ongoing cost. And the ongoing costs are usually picked up in the operating budget, actually. Um, One of the things I did notice is that the overall, I believe the overall amount that is proposed for police went down a little bit. And the reason compared to what was passed, um, and I think, and I'm going to double check that while we're talking, but I think
Mhm.
the reason why that occurred, and yes, it did. The reason why likely, and it slightly went down, not by a lot. But there seems to be, if you look at FY24, the actual spend on police personnel was about 760 million. The adopted budget had about 840 million for personnel. I'm picking out personnel because that's the most, that's like 90% of their budget. Um, the run, so the media run that they did when they proposed the budget that happened, 3 weeks ago, has their wage costs at about 812 million. So it's about, and it's projecting it out for the rest of the year. So that's approximately, almost $30 million below
Mhm.
what they have passed the budget at. So the proposed amount for wages for next year is 834 million. Is actually $7 million under what was adopted last year, and the total proposed amount went down by about 5 million in the police budget. And the reason why I bring that up is because a lot of these investments you see here, they're definitely necessary, and these will happen usually year to year, sometimes to more extent, less extent, depending on leadership, depending on priorities of that year. The bulk of the cost, though, in public safety is in personnel.
Mhm.
And so even if the budget is set at a higher number, lots of times, especially when it comes to wages, since they're all collectively bargained, you kind of have to set it at a certain number. Um,
Mhm.
there are vacancies though, and that's not unique to Philadelphia. I mean, when you look at workforce levels, especially of police workforce levels across the country in major cities, there's a shortage in most places. So not knowing exactly, but I believe the administration just might have right-sized their estimate this year. They're still fighting to recruit and retain officers and push up higher numbers in their training classes and things like that. But the
Mhm.
budget's also an exercise of reality. If you can, you only got 12 months in the year, so there might be some lag there, and they might have captured some of that. depending on where they're at right now, workforce levels. Um, so it's definitely not a divestment or anything like that. It's
Mhm.
more of like, I think that what they're doing is, I think what the mayor is doing is just trying to be smart about how she continues to budget around public safety and throwing things sorry, not throwing money, but proposing money to be spent on things that are going to make policing smarter and better, as she says. And some of these things are, I think, would have occurred in addition to a full workforce, but I think some of these things are also necessary when you don't have the fullest extent of your workforce at the moment. We know that the stats on public safety have gotten a lot better since she's been in office. So I see a lot of this of continuing to invest in this area and continuing to do the innovative things that they believe are working, and also finding smarter ways to police while still trying to get to a full workforce, but still have to do the job in between.
Another area that I heard during uh, the budget address was around the fact that you can't just police yourself out of problems associated with gun violence. The mayor was stating that we also need to do some other types of diversion programs. And so, do you see um, uh, what are the issues or the financial trade-offs that may come with doing both of both trying to recruit to meet the numbers that are projected, and then also try new things that are beyond just policing?
Yeah, that's a great question, Tanisha. I'm not know if I'm expertly qualified to know the financial. But I will say that I think that there's more traditional policing, and then there's newer stuff. So I mean, in my time in City Hall, even prior administrations had always kind of dibbled and dabbled with newer approaches, but still keeping most of the traditional approach to staffing. So I kind of see this as these programs that we see right here, I think are all they're not super costly on the short term relative
Mhm,
to the big size of their budget. I think they're very intentional to try to get at, some critical root causes of things that happen earlier in, potential criminal pipeline, if you want to call it that, or diversion programs are trying to decrease costs actually. The whole point is for people to, in theory, be rehabbed and
mhm,
come back and be productive citizens. And there's a financial advantage to that. There's financial advantage to the city, state, and country if people are not in jail and employed.
mhm,
Um, on both sides of the ledger, they be making money out here contributing through tax revenue and things like that. But then the city can spend less tax revenue on having to have somebody in prison, which we know is expensive. Um, so I think it's this is more of my citizen hat. Like,
mhm,
I think it's good to keep doing both. I like the newer programs. I think reducing the amount of people in jail is a good thing, and reducing the population in jail is a great thing for the budget. And
mhm,
finding better creative ways to especially reach our young people who do have a lot of promise out here, but sometimes just go make a wrong decision or two. I think all of these things are in the best interest of the city and the country. And if you look at it from an economic and fiscal standpoint, is exactly that. I mean, the biggest trade-off you're making is how many people can we keep out of jail?
mhm.
And then how
And
many people can we have be, again, economically and productive citizens?
then hopefully the hope would be that these initiatives are sustainable. In You had mentioned like the smaller costs, like relative to the overall budget. Like what I'm thinking of in terms of sustainability for maybe like a wellness court pilot or the expansion of the PAD program. How what is like the lifespan of a program, kind of like that as people are piloting? Like, what should just everyday people, if they're like really excited about these diversion programs because they agree with you about trying to find alternatives to traditional policing, what should they look for in terms of the timeline around these in your experience from like a financial?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think like the diversion program's been around, so like that should be able to be implemented uh, more quickly. I think, and again, a lot of these programs are going to be a lot of staff. So they're, just depending on, is the personnel already in place? Do they need new personnel? What other, support services might they need to actually run the wellness court, things like that. I think it's making sure there's budgets for the ancillary costs needed to support. Um, the first year of something new can take some time. Hard to put a number on it timeline wise. I think it just really just depends. Does it stay as the top priority? Sometimes that pushes the timeline up, right? If the leadership is saying we need to do this and do this first, that starts to shift people's time and effort to getting it done quicker. Um, and then the staying power, honestly, is up to the mayor and council. I've seen lots of programs start. I've seen them stop. Them going. I mean, obviously, you want to measure the success of the program. You want metrics. That's why the city has moved to program-based budgeting, which is a more performance-based system. Actually, we're doing equity-based budgeting, which is also performance-based too. It's just a different lens, but it's still performance-based. Um, and I think just going with that system, like the diversion programs continue to work, they'll probably stay. But yeah, having staying power, because I think that's like the side question you're asking, like how do programs become permanent?
Yes.
Well, one way is if it's attached to a grant, it'll be around for a while, right? Because you only spend it on that purpose. But that's usually honestly the priorities of council and the mayor. I could say the longer a program's been around,
Mhm.
it becomes more institutionalized.
I accidentally moved us to the clean and green, so thank you
It's
for
all good.
yeah, thank you for not rushing through that answer. Because I think that is that longevity piece of like how long can we expect to have something is definitely tied in with a number of our clean and green initiatives.
Yeah.
This has definitely been another priority of the mayor's to make sure that residents get the clean streets, well-maintained parks, safe roads that they deserve. Um, there are some exciting investments here, the expansion of the twice a week trash collection to North Philly. It had started in Center City and South Philly. And I know during my own time of going to different neighborhoods doing presentations, people were very hungry for this to go citywide. And some residents have told me that they are old enough to remember when that was a thing
Mhm.
across the city. Also, the anti litter task force, the increased tree planting, which I know there's a in terms of where that funding comes from can be a bit difficult to talk about. But again, doing a comparison between the investments into clean and green last year, like how do those compare to this year's? And should we anticipate that the expansion of some of these programs is signaling a commitment to a long-term investment, or should we still pay attention to whether or not they're a one-time only kind of focus?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think that like if you look at Clean and Green's budget, their budget also slightly increased from last year, marginally. But I think that so to address the question of what might be more one time and what might be long term,
Yes.
I'm gonna start to answer that how I started the last one. It's still dependent on leadership. I mean, at the end of the day, mayor and council really, they're the ones who the mayor proposes the budget, council passes it, and they really have the final say in what stays and what goes. Now that's from the budget standpoint, there has to be execution underneath. That's why there has to be agreement. I mean, they say council appropriates, the mayor spends, right? So
Mhm.
that's the check and a balance.
Mhm.
Council could appropriate money, the mayor could choose not to spend it. The mayor could choose to propose funding for a budget, council could choose to zero it out. So um, there has to be, I say that there has to be some level of agreement, right? Of what's passed in the budget is going to actually be implemented and executed. Um, with all that said, I also remember, I think I remember this twice a week. I certainly remember there was daily trash or like, street cleaning, weekly
Mhm.
street cleaning growing up and things like that. And I know there's been changes over the years with street cleaning. I've heard about twice a week trash collection. I don't know if I was alive when that happened. I might have been. I just don't remember. Um, the other cities will try these things as well. So I think it's a little bit of wait and see. I mean, I think one thing we do know is that cleaning green is a big priority of the mayor. It's a very
Mhm.
visible priority of the mayor. She also, the mayor constantly wants government to interact, more with the community, wants her government to be able to, be seen, be felt, so these types of programs really bring that touch that I think the mayor's going for, and that visibility that she's going for. So I think whether it's twice a week trash cleaning or Vision Zero projects or other cleaning green projects that really get the reach out into the community, I just think those things are going to keep expanding, just given as one of the mayor's top priorities. I think the senses, see, touch, and feel your government every day at work,
Mhm.
and these are the types of things that, can build city morale, build trust back in the government. And then, the interaction level can be different, engagement level can be different. That can bring a whole host of other benefits to solving other challenges as well.
Do you know how our investment in clean and green initiatives compares to other cities?
That's I have to pun on that one too.
No
It's
worries.
yeah, so because it's one of those things. This is a core serve, so public safety, clean and green, maybe not as much the green part, but the clean part stuff. These are definitely core governmental services that exist, big cities, or small counties, across the nation. So obviously there's going to be, there's always good deal to spend on sanitation and things like that. When it comes to the green part, it does vary. But Philadelphia has been a leader. I know that for a fact in terms of funding sustainability and some of the energy stuff that they do. Um, but in terms of specifically how do we rank, that is actually a good question.
Sure. To stay a little bit closer to home, City Council has been vocal about illegal dumping, street cleanliness. Does our budget, or does this current budget or just this administration's approach align with City Council's values from your experience?
Yeah, that's a great question too. I think we're gonna have to watch the council hearings to keep seeing. I
It
do
is a
think,
great plug for that. Yes.
yeah, I do think I put it this way: some of it will, and some of the members will feel more strongly about alignment, and others probably won't.
So then, economic opportunity for all, getting to the end of the vision statement. Economic growth and job creation are a focus of this year's budget, trying to not only attract new businesses, but retain them as well. So we see that in lowering the business income and receipts tax. There's lots to talk about here with the Jumpstart Business Fund replacing that 100K gross receipts tax. So I don't know if we want to start the conversation with some of the recommendations that the mayors and this current administration took from the Tax Reform Commission, or instead of doing the comparison that we did
Yeah,
you two, like, do we want to just talk about our tax revenue? changes?
Sure, sure. I mean, I'll say that, I think, this is a great step. I think everybody, the commission was really happy to see the mayor taking the proposal so seriously and proposing an option to council. And we hope that they still find the recommendations in the report fruitful and beneficial as they continue to deliberate during the budget process. And we think the end product will be something that will keep moving the city forward in this area. Um, so yeah, I do think that the replacing the exemption and the legal challenges around the exemption, and that's made the focus of this budget a little bit different in terms of which portion of the BERT tax to attack first. Um, but again, it's still, we feel as though that this is a great direction. I mean, it's something that, again, a lot of the data spoke to, but the BERT tax kind of being one of the biggest barriers to growth and retention. It's one of the taxes, if you look at other major cities or surrounding counties, some of our competitive peers, if we look at it from a competitive standpoint,
Mhm.
the BERT, particularly the net income portion of BERT, is very unique to Philadelphia. Um,
This might
so
be a good place. I'm so sorry to interrupt, but just in case anyone's like, what are they talking about? So just
sure,
a layperson's
yes,
it's the business income and receipts tax. This is a
yep,
double tax that like people often refer to it as a double tax. You have the receipts where
yep,
businesses are taxed on their total revenue, everything they're
right,
taking in, and then the second tax on their net income.
correct,
That is very prohibitive for some. Like when we think about businesses in the city,
right,
oftentimes I am very guilty of this as well. I'm thinking of huge businesses like Comcast and
yep,
um, uh, like IBX and Pico. I'm
yep,
thinking of larger ones, and but we have so many small businesses as
correct.
well, so we need to just have that in mind. So can you talk about like how the lowering of the BERT taxes is helpful for attracting new businesses?
Absolutely. I think when businesses decide to locate or they're making decisions to move or stay, they're looking at a host of things. It's not just taxes, but taxes is on that list.
Hmm.
To look at talent, access to work and employee talent. They'll look at where their employees going to live, how proximity people need to be in at the work site or not. Do they have access to choice neighborhoods? Do they have access to choice schools? Do they have access to transportation? Kind of like the Amazon bid. I don't know if you remember the Amazon bid
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
all of the things that they were asking for and all the things that cities were giving back to them. I mean, that's a lot of those things going to the decisions, and taxes is on that list. And sometimes the most important thing isn't the current rate. Now, in some owners, it might be, but I think what's even more important is what are you going to do in the future?
Hmm.
The predictability of where taxes might go, and staying course. A business planning likes predictability. So, I do think that if the effort continues to reduce these taxes and the city stays course and making the reductions that they say they're going to do, that will help with attracting and retaining businesses. I don't think that people are only coming to Philadelphia because they want low taxes. I think that it can be a barrier, right, that might break the tie in a decision. I don't think that businesses expect it to go to zero overnight either. But I think they want a path that they feel as though the city's committed to. And then if they choose to stay or relocate here, they can rely on the predictable reduction schedule. Um, so yeah, and by the way, it is very complicated. Business incomes and receipts tax, it is too. We call it's like a tax on sales and a tax on profit. But I want to stay away from the word profit. It can be something a little different. But it's a tax on sales and then tax on your net, right? After you pay your expenses. And that can, on top of the rates and potential burdensome of paying a tax twice, is very administratively burdensome and confusing. Um, so that's and that drives up cost for businesses. They have to hire accountants to do the more complex returns. So not only trying to remove a burden that business feels though is unfair to them and it's a competitive disadvantage to city of Philadelphia when looking at other cities and surrounding counties, but also trying to make the system simpler because that will also decrease costs in the system and hopefully that money can also be redirected towards growth.
And talking about simplicity, that kind of helps transition to the second uh, change that's there in terms of creating equality across businesses. So, again, please correct my very layperson understanding of the replacement of the 100,000 gross receipts tax. So that's kind of like the homestead exemption, but for small businesses, where the first 100,000 of your gross receipts, that piece is exempted, and then it's only after that in terms of your gross receipts. But that part is being challenged, like that initiative, because of the state constitution saying that we need to have uniformity across businesses. Is that correct? And so therefore
Yes.
we would create this jumpstart business fund to help the small businesses I had mentioned beforehand. Do we think, like, will this jumpstart business fund possibly provide the same level of relief, or eventually give the same type of relief for small businesses?
The mechanisms there. I think a lot of it is going to come down to execution. Right now, you have a buy right exemption that everybody has access to. And it's probably, even just understood, in the industry of how to get that exemption. Right now, it's going to be, from my understanding, grants. And there has to be a whole process there of how do you apply, how do you get it, receive the funds, what do you have to show, all of those things. So it'll become a process efficiency type question. Can the city execute? Given a potentially different process and different type of value that they could be receiving. Um, and then, but I will say that grants, the city of Philadelphia, I think, still has over 25 tax incentives and credits. Um, Sometimes I'm not suggesting that that's the right thing here.
Mhm.
A little bit indifferent on this part, but just sometimes in general, it is a best practice to turn credit programs, particularly into grant programs, because you can be a little bit more targeting on who gets what. That wasn't the intent here. I think the intent here is to, yes, if you just, instead of you getting an exemption, if you're a business, you can get it through, applying for some type of grant. And I believe the city is tried to fund it at an adequate level where there wouldn't be much impact um, on businesses who are going to eventually, I guess, sign up to receive these funds if they're eligible. But I think it's a little bit of wait and see to see how the execution goes. And, first year of execution sometimes can be a little bit mixed. I would also expect this to get better over time. Um, the city does have experience of giving out grants, emergency situations. They just got through gave out a lot of COVID grants and, two businesses as well through, some of their, forget exactly what they called that fund, but there's been some recent experience on how to create, new grant programs and push money out. So, I would expect a lot of effort to be focused on execution and making sure that, eligible businesses can receive the relief that the city intends to give them and they can get it timely.
That's really promising in terms of what to look for,
And
especially.
the amount will probably, after the first year, you'll have a better sense of any type of stuff like this, like after you hit a first real year of doing it, you have a better sense of like amount and things and how to right size it for future years.
So then, right before we turn it over to the questions, and I think there's a couple that have been posted, but there were a few things that were maybe left unsaid, specifically in the mayor's budget address. She alluded to the fact that she was going to do a separate, have a separate conversation about housing. And so there's the housing initiative, Housing Opportunities Made Easy, that was discussed like about 2 weeks later. There's definitely lots of conversation around SEPTA and what it has termed its nearing death spiral. There's issues around jobs in terms of workforce training that goes beyond city employment. And I wonder which one, for time for you, which one keeps you up at night? Which one are you thinking of as, I mean, you're no
All
longer
of them.
in a position, of course, well, that's very diplomatic. I think for me, if I
Yeah,
can, since
sure, sure.
all of them, SEPTA, as someone who lives in South Philly by Broad Street, that is something that I know concerns myself and definitely many of the partners who we support. And so, can you talk to us a little bit about what is currently in the city's funding towards SEPTA, or things that we should look forward to as we await like additional funding from the state?
Yeah, so I don't know the exact number in the city's allocation, but the city has a formulaic driven allocation of funding that they have to give to SEPTA each and every year out of the operating budget, and it's it is based on some formula based on ridership, things of that sort. Um, there's sometimes also some capital funding that goes over, or some matches with the city. But let's not be, SEPTA, like many public, transportation systems across the country, are all having revenue challenges right now. A lot of them were having revenue challenges before the pandemic. Um, that's public transportation as an industry became public because it wasn't profitable. That was the main reason, but we need people to go places so they can work. I mean, a lot of it is built around pushing the country's GDP. If you want to, bring it back to that, very high level data point. But transportation, it's a challenge. I think that I don't think the city's budget's ever going to be big enough to fund it itself. If you look at SEPTA's needs, you look at the city's current general fund, you look at the city's also requirement to fund schools and requirement to fund county services. um it'd be taking on a lot if they took over the whole gap, right? And so I think there's going to have to be some creative solutions. Ridership has not gotten back to where it was pre-pandemic. It has recovered from the early days of the pandemic, but it hasn't gotten fully back. um and then public transportation systems are supposed to be the state's responsibility, but so is education and lots of other things I mentioned. So I think that's going to be a big funding challenge going forward, and I think there's going to have to be some creative solutions on how to make that system better. The other thing I would mention, though, Tanisha, if I had to pick one thing that is happening right now out of these three options to keep me up at night, it's probably the jobs thing.
Mhm.
And the only reason why I say that, I feel like the mayor, has a housing plan, and we're going to find out more details about that plan any day now. And the focus is already there. Philadelphia tends to focus on housing. They're a leader model wise to a lot of other places when it comes to affordable housing. People look at PHA, what Philadelphia has done, and I think I'm glad to see the mayor keep carrying that torch. And she's trying to make it more about workforce and middle income housing as well, which is also a need in some of our middle neighborhoods, our working class neighborhoods, and easier access of getting people into homes who might be in high rent situations, and potentially helping out with the high rents, right? I think, again, keeping that as a focus, something that always keeps me up at night, but something that the city of Philadelphia tends to do better than most, believe it or not, anyway. The jobs thing, something else that the city does talk about a lot, but I think it's more prominent now. And I think that's related to, all of the confusion that we're seeing in Washington, and what that might mean going forward. There's going to be economic pressures if there aren't already economic pressures. If you turn on the news right now, and there's economic pressures, right? And what's going to happen to those? How's that going to impact, the U.S.? How's that going to impact our cities? How's it going to impact employment? Um, the city of Philadelphia, being the poorest top 10 city, is always at a little bit more of a disadvantage than everybody else, when there's a little bit of a downturn. So, um, I think, how can, and not just the mayor and council, but how can all the stakeholders in the city, how can committee 7, how can everybody in the city really help with the jobs piece? I think that's an angle that cannot be solved by government. I think government can lead the way, but the majority of people employed are in the private sector, and I just think it's going to take a bigger broader community effort to really protect the workforce training, and really provide the opportunities for our current residents who are lower income to have an opportunity to actually get out of income. And frankly, all of those things will support the tax base.
Hmm. That's exactly where I was going to take it to. Like, the more jobs we have, since currently wage tax is the largest local tax revenue. So we absolutely, not in a purely uh not just thinking of like what we can take from our citizens and
Right.
residents, but also,
Right.
for their benefit as well. Um,
And by the way, that formula of the wage tax, the wage tax used to be at 5.1% or 5%. It's at 3.7 now. It's slowly come down over past couple of decades, but it's been the growth in the employment base that has allowed for that to happen too. So, growth in income and growth in people employed. Um, so it's definitely, I think that's a direction that the city is going to continue to go in. And the more they can grow their base, any of their bases, you can start to lower, or like I like to call right size rates, not necessarily reduce. Sometimes you're just right sizing the rate. You're giving the taxpayer a little bit of a break back because you don't need all of that revenue because there's more people paying into the system.
mhm. So there are a couple questions that I think we have time for.
Sure.
So if people haven't already, please drop your questions in the Q&A. We have one question that says, can you share other cities that are comparable to Philly in
Mm,
terms of like size? I know that I've often thought of like Boston. I know that Boston's mayor is a big proponent of public trans. And so in those issues, I often direct people there. But for job growth or any of the other topics we were talking about, where should people be looking to kind of see how we stack?
it's a good question. So I think there's a few ways to go about, benchmarking essentially. Um, Let me start with, the city is very unique in its structure of being a city and a county. It makes it more unique than most of the other major 10 cities. Most cities live within a county, and a county functions, think health and human services, even think public safety. Like, you can think of things that are actually more county related, courts, um, that the city is responsible for. The other closest city county peer at our size, I believe, is Baltimore. And Baltimore is used as a pretty tight comp in everything I've seen. Baltimore is a little bit smaller than Philly, but still similar category. I mean, you'll always hear comparisons to Boston, to Chicago,
Mhm.
to some of the major cities. Down south cities get kind of weird. They can annex. So like cities like Houston and Phoenix had the ability to annex. Texas has some weird laws as a state. So you can draw some comparisons from those cities, but you kind of got to be careful about normalizing. Um, but yeah, I think sometimes you can compare based on credit rating inside the city. Sometimes the credit rating could signal similar challenges at other places. I would really look at demographics. Sometimes Cleveland can be a good comp. Uh, Maybe not Atlanta. They have higher income than us and cheaper housing, but it's definitely major 10, right? It's hard to get away from that comparison because frankly, that's what Philly wants to be. They want to be, at least I believe they still want to be a world class city. So
Mhm.
those are your world class cities, right? So there's still going to be comparisons there, but just got to be careful about city and county versus city, like making sure that the functions are being properly compared. Um, but I would say from a composition, size, and a functionality place, I think Baltimore is actually one of our closest comps. Um,
It's really helpful to think about so that I don't continually go up to Boston.
yeah,
Um,
and Boston's good. They're wealthier.
mhm.
They're heavily reliant on property tax. That's another thing. You can look at tax mix, and sometimes that can bring a nice comparison exercise. So, what other cities are less reliant on property taxes? That might bring a different type of comparison for a city of Philadelphia. Um, but yeah, it depends on what, right? If it's like if you're gonna look at property tax, right, that might bring a different group of cities. You might look at let's put it this way: Cleveland or Cayuga County is a city that we looked at when we redid our assessment process because they had similar housing stock and to Philadelphia, and so that was the best comp for property assessments. If that makes any sense. So it depends. It depends, but major 10 cities for sure.
Another question that we have, tax related, says, do you think the city should be lowering BERT at a faster or a slower rate? And how should it balance against raising those same funds from other sources?
Well, as chair of the tax commission, I think we would always like to see things done a little bit more aggressively. But we completely understand the practicalities of putting together a budget and making sure you have enough money for other investments and making sure you're shoring up your fund balances and keeping the city's fiscal health up and alive. So I think as at now being a person in the private sector and I think it potentially could be a little bit faster. I don't think slower would be the way to go for Bert. I think the quicker the city can get it down in a responsible way, where they're not taking away from any service delivery or any of the other priorities that they need to fund, and in a smart way that allows for some of the growth to actually matriculate into the budget. I think that's what the city should do, and they should try to keep being as aggressive as possible to funding that growth. Cities have to manage cash flow, right? You just need a certain amount of money each year and each day to pay the people. It's a very large employer, and they offer a lot of services, and there's a lot of people dependent on those services. So, again, balancing act. Definitely don't think it should be slower. If anything, if the city again can do the things and deliver on what they said they're going to deliver on in terms of service delivery, and are able to realize more growth and or savings, I would absolutely encourage council and the mayor to push some of that towards catalyzing some of the BERT reductions.
There are a couple other questions. Would you be open to me sharing them via email? And then when I do my recap of resources and sharing this video, would you mind if I sent those to you? That way, thank you so much. Like I don't want to open the floodgates for people like, oh, that's great. I'm going to send all the questions to Tanisha.
I,
She's like my connect to Matt. I know you're from your intro that you are again booked and busy. So thank you for being generous with that offer. I'll do the questions that were just submitted that we didn't have time for. Thank
right.
you so much for taking the time to walk us through in such relatable ways to understanding a bit more about what to look forward to in the budget hearings and just in the news and coverage that we see moving forward. Is there anything else that you would suggest if people are still curious and want to know more?
Yeah.
What would you suggest they do?
Yeah, I would say I definitely encourage people to follow some of the council hearings. You know, you'll learn a lot. They ask a lot of detailed questions, but believe it or not, I sat through and ran those hearings for almost a decade, and you learn more just by listening in than you do reading any book or watching any webinar. I mean, you'll just seeing it in real time,
Except
going
for
back
this
and
one,
forth.
except for this
Yeah,
one.
except for this one. This one is a good one. And the second thing I'll say, like, you know, the mayor and council have very hard decisions to make in a very testing time. There's lots of unknowns on, again, what federal actions may impact the city in a negative way. Some of those things are still a little bit unknown, what's going to happen to our economy. But one thing that I see the mayor doing, even in the midst of some of this short-term confusion, is still prioritizing her budget based on what she knows and what's reasonable towards things that are necessary for long-term growth and sustainable growth for the city. And that includes housing, that includes tax reform, that includes clean and green, right? I think, um, but it's going to be a balancing act. My last budget we passed at the city, it was the pandemic budget. And I'll
Oh,
never forget, I'll leave you with this, Tanisha. You know, one week we had over $1 billion, I think, looking like in reserves, and it was like we called it the investment 5 year plan because it was like the rosiest looking 5 year plan ever. I was like, oh, there's going to be no battle this year over the budget because there's actually a lot of or kicking, you know, butt revenue wise
yeah.
here. And then literally within a week, we went from like, you know, billion plus reserves, billions going through the plan to almost $1 billion hole for the ensuing fiscal year. Um, Had to figured it out without any layoffs at the time, but that's how quickly things can change.
Mhm.
But it doesn't mean that you don't plan to do things based on the information you know today. Just got to be
Exactly.
prepared to roll with the punches if they happen. And I know the city's prepared for whatever happens. They have a very experienced crew, and whatever happens, they will be prepared to respond in a responsible way.
That is such an uplifting and a positive note to end on. So, with that, thank you again so much for taking time to speak with us. And thank you to the audience for being here and asking such great questions. I will follow this up tomorrow with a thank you and some links so that you can forward this to people. And again, I'll share the questions that we didn't have time for with Matt and get those out to people. So with that, I'd like to say thank you and have a great evening.
All
Bye-bye.
right. Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.